Our next presenter, Anna Migas. Anna actually presented for us at our very first event in 2018 as well. Really excited to have her back. She gave an amazing talk. She's been doing performance presentations for what, 8 years now? 7, 8 years, somewhere in that? Yeah, I mean, I don't want to make you feel old, but I feel older for what it's worth. Like 7, but that's from every angle, animation, debugging. But I've been really, really looking forward to this talk, not just because Anna is such a phenomenal speaker, and if you haven't had the opportunity to hear from her yet, I'm really excited for you. But also because we've been kind of dancing around this topic. Honestly, I feel like the last couple perf nows and core web vitals and the prominence of that, but you know, sometimes we need to push ourselves beyond that, and I've been really, really looking forward to this session for that reason. So everybody, please welcome Anna.
Hi. You can hear me well, right? Thank you so much, Tim. So as mentioned, my name is Anna Migas, and I work as a lead UI developer at Field Intelligence, where we take care of improving the supply chain for pharmaceuticals in emerging markets. At the moment, it's Nigeria and Kenya. And I also hold the title of Google Developer Expert in Web Technologies area with specialization in web performance. I think also around 8 years, but I can't honestly remember. All right, it doesn't work. Why it doesn't work? OK. If you want to, you can follow me on Twitter. You can either scan the QR code or type in Shinshalishes. Good luck with that. And as mentioned, my topic for today, this clicker is not really doing well. My topic for today is thinking beyond core web vitals, subtitle, web performance optimizations for the harsh conditions. And you probably figured we're going to speak about web performance like as all day today and tomorrow, but there is a bit of a plot twist. We're going to speak about user experience connected to the web performance, another plot twist, as experience in harsh daily conditions. So today's talking points will be, first of all, we'll have some context about it, like African landscape, exciting. Then we'll talk about the reasons for bad web performance in certain conditions, secret web performance metric, wait for that, then tips and tricks for harsh conditions, and finally some summary. So starting with the context, as mentioned, I work for Field Intelligence, and I've been with them for last 3.5 years. And since we operate in such a interesting market, which is Nigeria and Kenya, and with healthcare, with like small pharmacies that are in like very rural areas, and even my colleagues sometimes have like very harsh conditions, I realized that what I have been passionate about and web performance in general is very detached from what I'm doing daily now at work, because a lot of these things just don't apply to my current work. It's a completely different landscape. And even just interacting with my colleagues every day, it makes me realize how different our conditions are. And you might, all right, it really doesn't work. And you might ask yourself, why should I care? Africa is far. Well, for me, it's far as well. I live in Poland, but I still work in a startup that operates mainly in Nigeria and Kenya. And since it's the second biggest continent, and IT and like in general, internet is like really booming in there, you might find yourself developing something for these markets at some point. You never know. But not only that, also it is a problem for anyone who's using an old device. Like think of your mom's phone or your grandma's phone, right? Anyone who's located in a rural area, or maybe when you're visiting your friends in a rural area, or anyone who's using an enterprise app that is like very hard to optimize, loads of data, and is like just slow. And well, the thing is, unfortunately, most web performance metrics and resources, they're developed with a privileged user in mind. And it makes sense if you think about it. Like, people who work on them are usually very privileged. They have super fast connections because they work on the web. They have the newest hardware. For them and for me as well, usually the web performance issues, they're only accidental. So for example, you're going to the metro, right, and you drop your connection. Or you are going for holidays somewhere, and just the connection is not as good as you're used to. And for some users, it is not accidental. Like, it is something that is like just a general rule that like most of the internet that you're browsing is going to be very slow. So even in the documentation, I know this is a bit deprecated metric, but I want to point out that in this metrics we would mention things like average mobile hardware and like how long it should take for things to happen for average mobile hardware. But the thing is, the average mobile hardware that is mentioned here usually is not the average mobile hardware that my clients and my friends at work are using. Thankfully, things are getting better, and for example, for the new INP metric, it is actually mentioned that they upped from 100 milliseconds to 200 milliseconds because of some lower-end devices. They wanted to take them into consideration. So things are definitely moving forward and getting better. But the reasons for like optimizing web performance are a bit different for us. For example, we would see all these things that, okay, I want to shave off 100 milliseconds of the load time so that we can make millions more, as Zalando did, like 0.7 increase in revenue after shaving off 100 milliseconds of the load time. And for my clients, 100 milliseconds is like, it will never happen. Things never load like that fast. So it's not about loading something fast or faster, but it's about loading something at all and actually empathizing with the user and making them achieve the crucial things they came to your website to achieve. And yes, for some users, the good web performance is just not achievable at all. Like, especially for my colleagues, it's like a lot of times I would get the video from them when they're testing something, and they send me a 2-minute video of like a spinner, and at the end something loads, you know. And by that time, I'll definitely think that something is broken, but they're very, very used to things like that, and they would say something, oh, it loaded a bit slower than usual, you know. And for me, it's I would definitely think something was broken by them. And to support why good web performance is not achievable at all for some users, I have quite a good quote about, from the article about Cache.js misconceptions. So at a high level, there are two primary performance bottlenecks on the web. First is networking, which is the round-trip time to acquire an asset or data payload from a remote server. And the second is end-user device compute, which is the amount of computational overhead required on an end-user's device. So if we look at the first part of this quote, the networking description very much looks like the description of latency, which is generally considered to be the amount of time it takes from when a request is made by the user to the time it takes for the response to get back to that user. So user is making a request, and then the request is making its way to a remote server somewhere and then is coming back. And unfortunate thing is that latency in most parts of Africa is really high. I'm using Africa as an example, and especially in Nigeria, because that's what I'm most aware of, but I know that there are regions like that that are not only in Africa. But latency in most parts of Africa is really high, and this is due to just the lack of infrastructure, basically. Unfortunately. And even if you go to the websites of the CDNs and they have the list of all their hubs wherever they have servers, you'll see that the amount of servers in Africa is usually way, way lower than anywhere else in the world. I even saw an article once saying that around 90% of websites from Nigeria, they're hosted in the US. So imagine that. It's like a huge physical barrier, like just making a request to somewhere in the US from Africa. And, well, high latency means long time to first byte, right? And to quote Harry, who was speaking here earlier, while a good time to first byte doesn't necessarily mean you have a fast website, a bad time to first byte it certainly guarantees a slow one. So from this one point, we're already guaranteed that something is going to be slower than what we're used to here. And yes, the connectivity is not great. And I spoke about infrastructure. So if you look at this, this map, you can see how big gap is like around Africa and parts of Asia and Canada, like North Canada. This is the coverage map for 5G. And yeah, take a picture, Jad. And if you scroll into it, doesn't get bad. So this is for Nigeria, and you can see that this connectivity is only around like big cities and big hubs, and like most of the countries like not covered at all by 5G. And I did a short poll with my colleagues, most of them in Nigeria, and asked like, what do you rely on? Do you rely on Wi-Fi or do you rely on the mobile data? And over half of them said mobile data. I would have more answers if I knew I had to pay for Poly to get like more results, but I didn't. And so like most of them rely on mobile data. And it's also not only like another reason for that is like, first of all, Wi-Fi is like very expensive to set up. And second of all, it's not that reliable because there are also issues that maybe you would not think about, but they have very regular blackouts in Nigeria, especially since last year the new government came into play, and the blackouts are very often happening. Like a lot of time, my colleagues would tell something, oh, I've not had power since like yesterday evening, I couldn't charge my device. So obviously the router also is not working. And yes, they can have generators in their houses, like so that they can have their own power source. But for that, you need fuel. And inflation has been terrible in the last year. Fuel is way more expensive than it used to be. And also, it's not easy to get sometimes. Like they would say, oh, sorry, I had to step out early in the morning because I was queuing for fuel. Like, when's the last time you had problems like that to get electricity, right? And I'm going to reuse the map that Tammy mentioned before from Annie Sullivan's work, which was based on the historical data for Core Web Vitals and how we improved LCP and IMP. It shows the performance inequality gap pretty well. So at the top you have LCP, and you can see, unfortunately, Africa is like this red blob on the map, and it didn't improve that much. Thankfully, IMP has improved, but it's more down to the type of devices that users have and maybe computational power, so at least that improved. But yeah, connectivity in general is not great. Also, Rick has prompted me that he had this map for round trip by country, and again, we can see that Africa and their round trip time is just not great in general, right? So these are all like systemic issues that they are there all the time. But also there are like accidents. Like for example, in March, a lot of my colleagues, most of my colleagues, had no internet for like 3 or 4 days because some underwater cable just got broken, you know? And like the whole country didn't have internet for all this time. I know this is accidental, but when's the last time we had an accident like that anywhere in Europe? Like, anyone had accident like that in here? I doubt so. That something like that can just like take out internet in the whole country here. So that was on the connectivity side. The second part of the quote that I had was about the end user device compute. So this is about the devices that are used. So Nigeria is considered a mobile-first market where infrastructure and online usage development skipped wide-ranging desktop PC adoption and went straight to the mobile internet usage via inexpensive smartphones instead. So there are 2 parts to this quote that you need to pay attention to. First of all, they skipped the wide-ranging desktop PC, which means for a lot of users in there, their first contact with internet was through the smartphones. They've never had the chance to use the desktop PC to browse the internet. And even now, for a lot of people, it is the only way to access internet. So if something doesn't work on your phone, you sometimes go to the desktop to fix it, right? And try to get the desktop version of the websites. Well, for them, it is not a choice, like they don't have this opportunity. Which also means that the digital literacy of a lot of users is like completely different because, well, they've not been around web and just like more like devices that much. And another part that you need to take a look at is about inexpensive smartphone parts. So we already know from the keynote talk that most of the world is using Android devices, but you don't even know like how wide the range of these devices is. There's, for example, this Chinese brand called Techno, and their devices, their smartphones have been pretty popular in the African markets. And the devices they make, they have two big features that are making them sell well. One of them is that they're cheap because the purchasing power is not so great. And another one is that these devices just can last for a very long time on charge. So this ties to this thing where you just lose your power and you're unable to charge your devices. Funnily enough, even yesterday, one of my colleagues wrote in our Slack channel, like, sorry, I went out to charge my laptop at my neighbor's, and I locked myself out of the house, you know? So, like, these are the things that just don't happen to us usually, unfortunately. So with these lower-end devices that are, like, as you can imagine, way less powerful than what we're used to in here, unfortunately, the parse and compile can often be way longer than on the desktop devices as well. Like in general, it's like 2 to 5 times as long on phones as on desktop. But also another thing is the less powerful device, the longer it would take. So not only you had to wait for way longer than us in here to get the data because of the latency, but also on the other side, your device is like unable to process it as fast as usual. So you can see that from both sides, you're very, under the attack of like slow web. So this is the reason why most of the metrics that we know and we use, Core Web Vitals, they don't seem to have like that much use when thinking of optimizing the internet for such conditions. That's why I would like to propose a separate metric for this. Secret web performance metric, which is patience. And I would like to define it as how long are you willing to wait for the website to load before you decide it is broken. Fuck yeah. I really wanted to quote my favorite slide from Harry's talk this morning. So with this metric, as I mentioned, like for us, the bad, slow web is mostly accidental and like only on occasions. But if you think about it, when the first time you go to your internet, like the internet speeds have been very different and the devices have been very different from now. And I remember myself downloading, I know, illegally, songs for myself or like music videos, and I was way more patient back then, and I was able to wait for a prolonged time to actually get something downloaded for myself, and I bet you all did as well. And today, if my YouTube video is not buffering fast enough, I'm getting frustrated. So it's also a bit conditional, you know. So my colleagues and a lot of users in there, they're just used to that, so they're patient and they can wait for longer. And for them, everything is slow. And optimizing, like shaving off 100 milliseconds doesn't really make that much sense. But there are different optimizations that we can make for these types of users and people in such conditions that will make bigger impact than just optimizing one or another metric by 100 or 200 milliseconds. So let's talk about some solutions now. So first of all, the visibility of system status. To quote one of the 10 usability heuristics from Norman Nielsen Group, the design should always keep users informed about what is going on through appropriate feedback within a reasonable amount of time. So in this case, when we know that something is going to be loading for way longer than usual, and we are prepared for that, a much bigger improvement will be just telling the user what's going on. So we want to make sure to give user information as fast as possible. First of all, what is going on? Like data is downloading, something is uploading, something is syncing. I really am bad with examples now, sorry. But you know what I mean. You basically want to tell user what is going on and why something is taking its time. Also, you want to tell the user how long it can take, but only if you have actually information about this, because saying that, oh, it will take only a few seconds, and you guessing that it will be a few seconds, while in reality it's taking around a minute, it's not really helpful. So you want to have an actual data about how long something is going to take, and show it to the user as well. And also, we want to let user once some error occurs and what can be done about this. If this is their connection, if this is the server issue, if this is something else. You want to be very good with your errors so that the users actually can take it and have some action, like, I don't know, reach out to support and maybe try to check their connection. And I really like how Google Maps offline are doing it, because they'll tell you about that's, oh, maybe this download will not cover these selected areas. It tells you how the downloading is progressing, and then it will tell you how to use the maps as well. And also it will tell you when you have error and what can be done about this. In our app, for example, we prevent users from logging out if they are downloading data, because we know how bad it will be for them to re-download it. Because this is basically some updating of the app that is taking a while, and we know that they're very impatient. So even, they're patient, but they're very curious. So if something is downloading while they're patient, they still might want to click around and see what's going on. Because, yeah, their digital literacy is not too great. So you need to take that into account as well. You want to use simple language. So for us, it's obvious what the browser is, what the tab is in the browser, and things like this. But for the user that only got a smartphone a year ago, for example, and they know that, OK, if I click here, I can search for things, they might not know what the browser is, you know? And like all this lingo might not be like too obvious for them. So you want to use the simple language. Also, as mentioned previously, you want to discourage damaging actions. I have a really interesting example for that. So I was in Nigeria on the ride-along with one of our drivers, and it wasn't someone new. He worked with us for a few years, and we were doing deliveries, and the connectivity in the area where we were was not great. So he was waiting for the list of products in the delivery to download, and it was taking a while, and we saw his spinner, and he was just like pulling on his phone. And I was like, why are you doing that? What are you doing? And he was like, oh, I'm just bored, you know? And he didn't realize that he was like refreshing the page over and over, and that's why it was taking time. So you need to take things like that into consideration, because they're definitely not obvious for us. You want to render initial information as soon as possible. So you want to make sure that there's some initial content visible, letting users know what is going on quick, so that they don't have to wait maybe for the whole app. So definitely you want to tell them like, okay, I'm like fetching all products in the location, maybe like load the navigation in case they want to navigate somewhere, or use the skeleton screens where like some slower downloading information is a bit later. They don't have to wait for it to download to see the rest of the app. You also might want to leverage progressive enhancement, which used to be a big thing when I started in tech, which might tell you how old I am. And it is to make it possible to achieve the most crucial action first. And you want to add extra features and fireworks on top of that. And I know it sounds like something old, but if you think about this, your users are not coming to your app to see the most beautiful pictures, unless it's like an Instagram, right? Or like to see the animations, or like how beautiful UI you've built. They come to your website to achieve an action that they wanted to achieve in the first place when they were going there. And I know this is an accidental lack of good performance example, but I was going to South Africa once and to Safari, and my luggage was lost. And then I was driven off to this rural area where the connection was really, really bad. And I couldn't find out what was going on with my luggage, because the form to ask about this didn't load, because it was like so heavy. And I had no other way to reach out to the airline, because they were not really providing it. So I had someone in the hotel actually try calling and asking, like, how can we find out about this luggage? So I was in the same tracksuit that I came to South Africa for 5 days on a safari, you know? So yeah, I really wish at this moment that the form was just very simple and they didn't put so much effort into making it so heavy. Yeah, an example of before progressive enhancements of the Wikipedia page. Another thing is you want to avoid request chaining and round trips, and you might want to consider using resource hints. So during the previous talk, we really had a good deep dive into resource hints, so I'm just going to briefly go through this. First of all, pre-connect, if you want to eliminate costly round trips from your request path and, for example, establish the connection with the CDN that is going to be used later. We all know by now that you need to use cross-origin attribute on that as well for it to work. The second one is to prefetch, to fetch resources and store them in cache, and maybe for resources that are needed in the next navigation. For example, if someone is filling in the form and at the last step they'll see some image, like greetings or something like that, you might want to consider prefetching that as well. Just don't do it too much. And preloading for loading late discovered resources early, and as well we had this font example as well before. So if the font is only first mentioned in the CSS style sheet, we'll have to only stumble upon it in the style sheet before it starts getting downloaded. Well, we know well that this font is definitely going to be needed in the latest stage. You want to cache as well. We had a reminder about it today, but yes, you want to serve static resources with a long time to load to avoid re-downloading them on the next visit. This is very crucial, and we saw how many websites fail at this very important step. And also connected to cache, you want to test for back and forward cache. So if a user clicks on a navigation item by mistake, it can minimize the time for them to navigate back. In case you're not familiar with back-forward cache, this is something that the browser will do. Most modern browsers will do by default, that if you go to one page, they take a snapshot of previous page you've been to, and then if you click back, it just restores the snapshot without downloads and all. And it does it automatically, unless you break it. And a great way to know if you have broken it or not is to go to Google DevTools, and in the application tab under the cache, you have the back-forward cache, and you can test it on the pages and see if you have broken it or not. If not, it will show you the check mark. If you somehow, for some reason, the back-forward cache cannot be restored, it will tell you why it cannot be restored. Optimize images you ship, and I should probably say videos as well, because we've seen how big part of the downloads in general, images and videos are. Unfortunately, they're usually the heaviest resources on the web. So this is just a reminder, because most of us already know about this, but we just forget. I know that. You want to use correct and modern formats. You want to use tools to optimize the size of the images. So this is obviously for one-off images, but if you have a blog, for example, I don't know, some website with shopping, you want to set up your CDN so also the images are optimized on the fly. Also, you want to remember about adding size or aspect ratio to avoid the layout shifts, which is as easy as adding the class with the width and height of the image, or maybe adding the aspect ratio of the image. This will make sure that if the image is taking some time to download, the space will be saved for it, and there will be no uncomfortable shifts when someone is trying to consume some of the content around it. Lazy load resources that are not critical. We already spoke about this briefly, but you don't want to force your user to download resources they might never discover. The data is very crucial. So these days we can do it as easily as adding loading lazy attributes on our images and some other content types in certain browsers to make sure that if user doesn't get to the places in the page where they are seated, they will never be downloaded. And in similar way, you might want to learn about network client hits. hints. The network information API helps you to access information about the user's network and device, which can be really handy. So the first one, navigate to connection save data, is the one that will tell us if user has the low data mode on in the device. So sometimes, you travel to the foreign country, have very limited data on roaming, and you just set it up for the low data mode. So this is how you can know if your users actually have this selected. And based on that, you might, for example, not ship images, or maybe decide to ship the version of the website before it's progressively enhanced, like in the bare minimum version. And the same is with device memory. So we talked about how lower end devices have trouble with making sure that the content consumed is actually in a fast way being understood by the browser, and the amount of the memory that is on device will heavily impact that as well. With for example, long tasks that can very heavily impact the browsing for the user. If you're using React, there's pretty cool library with React hooks for using this network hints that will help you find out about your users' devices' capabilities. In a similar note, you want to limit third-party resources. We all know that they can delay initial load of the page. You want to load them asynchronously whenever it's possible, either using async or defer attributes. It's just a reminder. I know you all know this, but I want you to remember about that. And also, if you're still using Webpack, which in general will just chunk all the JavaScript into this one massive file, you might want to consider splitting it again, but in some meaningful way. And for example, you can use for that Splitting Chunks plugin for making sure that, for example, in this screen we have Mapbox and Diffree that are split out, and some parts of our app they're not making use of this. So they'll never have to download it. I know that Dan is going to speak a bit more about things like this tomorrow, so tune in for that. Another thing that you can consider is using a service worker. So if you expect your page to be visited on a regular basis, you can cache your resources bare. And we have been working on the PWA ourselves because our users use our app on a regular basis. And I found a great article on example with Jumia. So Jumia is our Uber Eats, basically. It's very big in Africa. And for them, because of starting to use PWA, they saw 33% higher conversion rate, 50% lower bounce rate, 12 times more users versus native apps, because the barrier of entry for them was so much smaller, 5 times less data, 2 times less data to complete the first transaction, and 25 less device storage required to use the app. And it's really big. I mean, I don't know if you've ever been to these parts of Africa, but Jumia is really big. I was ordering food on Jumia, and before I knew about the stats. Well, another thing is, if you order from Jumia online, they would still call you to confirm you wanted to order food. But, they're very used to calling people there, basically. Then another thing you want to avoid is creating too many layers. And when I say layers, I mean browser layers. So each layer that is created by the browser will take devices' resources, which we all know that they are very crucial at this point. And the same goes for the DOM size. And you might want to consider, for example, using virtualization if you have a massive list of many items, or pagination, even better. And with the layers, the thing is, by default, the browser will just create one layer, but there are certain conditions and things that will make the browser create more layers, which is optimization on its own. And we know like fixed elements, iframes, certain types of animations, they will create another layers, and it's great. It's optimization, and it makes, in general, the web faster. But the problem is when we have too many layers and they're being created without our knowledge or against our will. And to test how many layers we have, I strongly suggest checking out the Layers tab in DevTools in Chrome as well. To get to that, you want to use this three dot menu in the top right, go to More Tools, and then Layers. And we'll show you all the layers that you have on your page. You can use this like cool 3D view as well. And it will tell you why the layer was created and what's the memory estimate for each of these layers. I know that sometimes when I was playing with this 3D view and I was going overboard and there were too many elements on the page, it would crash sometimes. So you can also use it without this, this preview option, and it will also tell you about all this, all this information about the device memory. And last but not least, you want to break long tasks. And I know that tomorrow there is a talk about INP, so I'm pretty sure it's going to touch on that. But unfortunately, the slow-running scripts are bad on the low-powered devices. So you want to implement strategies that will break up long tasks and will not impact the INP metric. I know we're like beyond core web vitals anyway, but probably you want your metrics to look nicer. And in general, you want the interactivity to be better. So definitely tune to understand more about how breaking long tasks and how the INP metric can be combined. That was the last point I had. So in summary, you want to let your users know what is going on. You want to load some information early for them to understand what's going on. You want to progressively enhance your website so that the user is able to achieve the tasks they came in to your website in the first place for. You want to avoid request chaining and use resource hints for mitigating the latency issues. You want to lazy load your content below default so that the user doesn't have to use the data that is so scarce and needed if they don't have to. You want to leverage network information API, limit third-party resources because they can be a big bottleneck, and sometimes if they break or are unavailable, it might break even for the users that are in privileged conditions. Optimize for bug-forward cache so that the users can navigate back and forth easily. Consider using the service worker if it is applicable, if your website is being viewed quite often. You want to avoid using too many layers and repainting content, and you don't want your DOM to be too big. And in general, just try to have more empathy for the users that have a bit different conditions from you, and have in the back of your head that your conditions are not the conditions of your users. Definitely you want to use the real user data and understand like what your user base is. But from time to time, all of us are in the moments where the connection is not great. So I believe like every website should be optimized for this. I'm going to share the slides later, but I have quite a few resources in here if you want to read more about the context and more about the landscape in the African internet. Okay, you want to take a picture? Go on. No? All right. Yeah, so I have quite a few resources, and also at the moment we're hiring. If you're interested in working maybe on supply chain for pharmaceuticals, then hit me up, we can talk. And thank you very much for having me. I also wanted to give a big shout out for having me here. I'm so excited to be here after so many years. I was here at the first edition, and ever since, when anyone would ask me, I would say it's my favorite conference ever. And also shout out to Rick Visconti for taking a look at my slides and helping me out. Thank you.
Thanks, Anna. Okay, I've got a few for you here. So one thing that, like, you were talking about, like, providing that information and that feedback right away and that instantaneous. I know you've talked in the past and done some work around, like, animation. I think that's kind of how that was, like, your teaser, right? And, like, into getting into performance.
Yes.
I'm curious, is there an opportunity, or did you experiment at all in that particular project, or just generally thinking, an opportunity for animation to be part of that process of like providing that immediate feedback, maybe providing like a little bit of a connecting point between, hey, something happened to here's the actual end result?
Yes, we did that in a few places. You know, we have some cloud with like animated loader and things like that. But every time we were working on something like this, we definitely tried to make sure that the animation is not too heavy and it's optimized. It's only using opacity or transitions. It doesn't like use any heavy lifting. We didn't install any heavy libraries for animation, so they're like very raw, and like they help users, you know, to connect the dots and understand how the content is layering and how it's like coming together and where they came from and where they're going. But it's always done in a way that doesn't take too much resources, just a few lines of CSS.
That's a really, really good point because, yeah, we can be very heavy-handed with some of that sometimes. From a testing perspective, really curious about that as well. Like, as you're testing these experiences, both the optimizations and things like, you know, what is the state in the situation when this thing is really slow or breaks, could you go into a little bit of like, what was that testing process like? Did you find that browser dev tools and existing tools were sufficient? Did you find that they fell a little short of like maybe being able to really demonstrate just how significant the problem was?
They were definitely helpful, but definitely came short at the same time. So there would be like at times when I was testing something and I would send it to my QA team, which was way more helpful with testing, and they would send it to me back and say like, it doesn't work for me, and only then I would have a chance to see like how severe like their conditions were, and like for example sync with them and have them use the app in front of me, so that I could understand what was going on. Maybe like a race condition or something like that. That happened like twice. That I introduced something that, for example, there was a button and. You know, for me, it was obvious that you click a button and something happens instantly. But they were able to click it many times before something happened. And unfortunately, these are the things that, we learned hard way after having, for example, like multiple orders because someone was very impatient and kept clicking.
Yeah, I could see that. So was the QA team, were they like on site in Africa with like the kind of devices and stuff that would be representative? So,
yes. Most of my team is actually in Nigeria, and they live and operate in there. And they have different types of devices. Not all of them have iPhones. Not many of them have iPhones or MacBooks, and they're definitely like all of them have different conditions. Like I have people who have usually very good connection. It's never spotless, never. But most of the time have good connection, and I have people who cannot be on a call with the video. And actually, most of our meetings at work, like no one has camera on, which can be really handy if you're like cooking in the background or something, but or in your PJs. But at the same time, you know, it's hard to get this connection. But I know that for them it's just like too significant usage of data, and like basically it's usually ending up with them hanging up because their connection just broke if we use video on the calls.
Sure. So you went through a bunch of great optimizations, and one of the things that hit on this, and I think it's something that it's been a recurring theme around progressive enhancement around the early days of mobile, and it's often these things that we talk about like that are the best things you can be doing for folks in these scenarios actually benefit everyone. And just curious, are there any of the things that you went through where you're like, okay, I don't think that that's got a big like impact on like maybe, you know, the more privileged use case, or is it basically everything there that you were talking about? You know what, we can probably all universally benefit from this.
Well, I think like just everyone would benefit if every page has like the low data version of it, I think, but I don't think it's going to happen because I think most companies just don't care, and everyone is so used to, having this instant connection to like great mobile data and just downloading so much data. So I think it's probably just a dream to have it, but as mentioned, like there was a website of the airline that just didn't work for me when I needed it most, and I'm a privileged user, but I was in this situation where it actually would help me out. I mean, it doesn't have to be, just bare HTML, no CSS at all. It can be just something in between that is just not as, hard on the data maybe.
Yes, I'm a big fan of like, CNN Lite and a few of those other like versions like that. So I'm fully behind you on that. One last question is about, you were talking about the importance of empathy for the user and understanding those situations. And obviously for, a company like, yours where everything is targeted at that demographic, like you can't get away from it. And the QA team is there and you've got access to those like devices and conditions. Do you have some recommendations for those of us that, maybe that's not the core environment yet of our user, maybe, we don't have access to folks that are on the ground in those kind of situations, to like recommendations or tips for like how do you develop that empathy and how do you develop like what that kind of, that feeling of what it's like to use something in broken conditions?
Well, first of all, you might want to invest in some lower-end device to try using it and see how it goes, or go on holiday into a place like Maldives or somewhere where the connection outside of the bar area is going to be terrible, and you like see how bad it can be. You can also try using your grandma's phone, in the forest. But in general, I would look at the real user metrics and real user data to see if there's a need for that, and maybe see like what sort of devices are popping up more. Maybe it's just like older Samsung phones, from a few years back, and you can see if things are still working well with your app that you're developing on this type of devices, and try to throttle your connection a bit.
Awesome. Thanks. Great tips.
Thank you very
Thank you,
much.
Anna.
Thank you.